Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about a wonderful way that people can begin to examine and live in such a way that they might find the mystical, the magical, and the miraculous all come together at once. Sometimes as we go through life and we begin to approach middle age, we've tried many things that have probably set us back, or perhaps old wounds and the memories of childhood begin to supersede us. We begin to wonder if these things that we used to think of as children are ever going to exist for us again. On our program today, we're going to be talking with biologist, author, educator, who has more than 40 years of teaching experience, including 2 years teaching high school, 20-plus years as a professor of biology, 4 years as a counselor for elementary and intermediate school children. She's been working with learning difficulties and the like. You might just simply say she's probably seen and heard just about everything. So whatever you bring to the plate or to the table today, you might be able to become curious. Just open your mind, your heart, and your spirit to the possibilities of what is simply known as Playing in the Unified Field, which is the title of her book. It's Raising and Becoming Conscious, Creative Human Beings. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Ms. Carla Hannaford. Carla, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you.
Do you prefer to be called Dr. Carla?
Oh, just Carla is fine.
We won't be so concerned with titles, which tends to sometimes, I think, get a lot of us in trouble over the years as we begin to point and label things, don't you think?
I believe that, absolutely.
Now tell us, Carla, what was it that set you off on your journey of more than 40 years to put you where you are today?
Well, I was a nature kid. I was in the woods and on the farms in the summer. Very curious about everything. I wanted to know and understand everything. And the other thing was, I didn't read till I was 10. If I were in school today, I would have been in special ed. I was very gregarious, very, very curious, and didn't excel in school at all. And it was a real interesting lifestyle. I had older parents. It was pretty introspective time. Learning things. And as I went through, yes, I wanted to be a veterinarian. And when I went to Colorado State, this was back in the 60s, they had actually closed the school, the vet school, to women because they felt like the program was very expensive and that women were go through the program and then have children and not work with the program. And so I ended up in zoology. I have a bachelor's and master's in zoology. Then went on in botany for a number of years and actually quit because the head professor I had took my research and published it. I felt wrong. I started teaching. I taught high school. I loved it. And I started teaching at the university and teaching biology. And, of course, if you're teaching, you're learning like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And things were changing then so much. I mean, we just discovered a code for DNA through Watson and Crick. And I was working with electron microscopy, which we thought was the end-all, be-all. But it changed. It kept changing. And what we would see, we would do these sections that we would freeze first and then realize that we were killing living tissues, that we weren't looking at tissues as they were moving and changing. And so we ended up working with better and better microscopy. It's just been a real interesting journey of realization that we have no answers. there are no facts in biology. So, in the more recent years, in the past 20 years, I've really turned to quantum physics. What is consciousness? Who are we really? You cannot go to the atom and say that's the beginning point. As I was teaching biology, we put together atoms with styrofoam balls and toothpicks and stuff, but it's not like that. It doesn't give us a true perspective of who we are, what we are. And when we start looking truly at what we are beyond the model, atom model. The atom model is an interesting thing. It isn't true to form. Like, for instance, if the nucleus of the atom were the size of a grain of rice in the center of a football field, the first orbital around that nucleus of the atom would be around the outside of the football field. In between is all this space. We are 99.99999% space, but the space is not empty. As William Tiller, who I think is one of the top scientists on the planet today, that space is filled, it's reciprocal space, it's filled with magnetic energy, the highest energy we have. When we put our two fingers together and feel those fingers, we're actually feeling reciprocal space. We're feeling magnetic space rather than electrical space, which is what the atom is. The atom has particles that are electrical. So together that forms that electromagnetic space. So what we've discovered, what scientists have discovered, is that we are actually VIPs, vibrational interference patterns, vibration, that we live in a sea of vibration, that we are actually affecting that sea. We affect the environment around us, our wishes, our intentions, what Dr. Tiller calls deltrons, and that we are also very affected by that sea of vibration. So, in a way, we are masters of our reality, and we choose what happens within. We really truly affect the environments that we're in, the world that we live in.
It's fascinating to explore this, because you might have listeners out there who will say, well, if I'm a creator of this reality, how come I feel that so many things tend to go against me? Then there would be those listeners that listen and they say, well, life is pretty easy and I feel like a co-creator, but I guess I just don't think about it too much. I just sort of allow, if you will. And I think it would be interesting to be able to have 3 or 4 people sit out on one of those sunny days where those big billowy white clouds pass overhead and begin to see how they can shape the reality of what those images and those clouds would become, to see if any one or all 4 of them would come to the same conclusion all at once. Especially when you talk about consciousness.
Yeah. Here we are in this wonderful playground. It's an incredible playground as masters. And that we draw to us the experiences that allow us to grow. Allow us to grow in. That's what the quantum physicists are now realizing. We really are doing it. Everybody is right where they need to be at this moment for their greatest growth. When I start to think in those kinds of terms, it's like, who do I draw into my life right now for the learning? It's really interesting. Many times I draw people to me that are great mirrors of who I am, and that I start to see the areas where I'm not living fully my potential. Clearly at what is possible. Living great thoughts. I think when we can go back, I have been so fortunate in my life to have many of my teachers be children. Children are still living in that place of curiosity, that wonderment. One of my favorite quotes from Einstein is, he said, "I have no special gifts. I'm just passionately curious." You know, he was living every moment. Right now, of course, we're getting all these teachers, great teachers, saying, just be present in the moment. Mm-hmm. You know, that's all we have to do. Be absolutely present. Be aware. And wake up, you know. And children do that until we start messing with their reality and saying, no, that's not the way it is, and no, you have to be like this. But stand back and watch children. They are just, wow, look at that. And they see things. If we could see through their eyes, we come back to that space. And I think we all can. And if we do, we start looking at the wonder that the world is. I live in Hawaii. Every day is a miracle. Every moment is a miracle. And I look out on this little farm that we have. The new plants that are coming up now that it's everything's a miracle. Everyone is a miracle. Every person, if you really listen. And it was interesting. At one point, I was asked to be the counselor for special ed at the elementary school. After a year working with the intermediate kids, the kids still working there and working with the grade school as well as teaching at the university full time. I was younger. And I was a full-time mom, single mom. But being a counselor at the grade school, the counselor there said to me, "You're not a counselor, you're a biologist. Come and watch me." And I did. I went and sat in his office for a couple hours, and these little kids, these cute little kids would come in, and he'd say, "You've been bad. You go back and be good." And I thought, oh, gee. But luckily, this was the first week of school, and on Friday, we had an in-service in Honolulu, and the keynote speaker was the warden for the maximum security male prison. And I thought, wow, what's he going to tell us? He said, you know, when one of those men walked through my door, I say to myself, what has this man come to teach me? What is the dance we're to do together? I think that's what it is. You know, we are always drawing teachers to us. Mm-hmm. And listen and see what they're giving to us as a gift. You know, 68, and life is more precious and more glorious now than it's. Mm-hmm. And I've been through major back surgery, which gave me a lot of perspective and slowed me down. Really looking at life deeply. So, you know, older, I think it's a real gift to us to slow down, give ourselves that time to be truly, truly conscious. Right now, I'm seeing, with all our wondrous technology, we're seeing some real difficulties with young people. And I do think, in a way, they're also great masters, and they're pulling in what they need. But it's interesting. Huge study done with teenagers where they cannot read body language because they've been texting. They're missing the nuances of what people are saying and what they're feeling because they're not being body language or facial expressions. Of course, we see this in the increasing group of children with autism. They can't see, can't see language. I see them as being the canaries in the cave. They're very, very bright, very, very sensitive people that are living in a sea of chaos, of stress, a lot of anxiety. They're mirroring the around them. We choose to live in that anxiety. We miss what is in the moment. Studies are very interesting. Right now there's less crime in the United States than there ever has been. Time that, there's been history.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there's all this anxiety. Thing that we can let go of the stress and just absolutely stay present in the moment. Live deeply, we live past. Curiosity of that child comes back to us where we can really live. And then we become models for those around us, for these young people. People that are coherent. The main word that quantum physicists use. Absolutely present. Aware. When we live in that coherence, fear, joy, there's excitement, there's enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
With this playground that we've created for ourselves.
Now, Carla, here is a good point as well to begin, even though we can begin from any direction when you're in a unified field. It begins anywhere. And that is that of coherence. You talk in your book about the energy waves and the way of coherence, and then what incoherence is. Mm-hmm. Describe that for our listeners so they get a better feel of how this gives them the opportunity, or maybe the seeming lack of, depending on which way they want to go, to begin to express and be the reality of possibility.
Okay. What I want to do is start with some interesting research. I'm a neurophysiologist. That's what my PhD is in. And so I have been focusing on the brain. Well, almost 30 years ago, people started looking at the heart. And actually, it's more than that. It's 40 years ago. In the 1960s, Dr. Amwar, who is a cardiac anatomist at Yale University, wrote a long article in Scientific American. This was in 19. He said there are 80% more fibers going from the heart to the brain than the other way around. He made an audacious statement at that time. He said, the heart must be controlling the brain, not the other way around.
Wow.
And everybody said, well, wait, it's just a pump. Well, in the years since that, in the 1970s, two endocrinologists realized that the heart is producing major hormones, atrionatriuretic factor and cardiac androgenergic factor. These are two of the most powerful hormones in our body that really control the main functions. They control the pituitary gland, so the hormones, what we thought was the master hormonal gland in our body, coming from the heart. And it's affecting everything. So here's an interesting thing. The heart really is picking up what we know now is picking up vibrational waves from our environment. The heart field, the electromagnetic field off the heart, is so much larger than any of our other electromagnetic fields from our body. It's 60. That may not be accurate. I'm not thinking. At least 160 times greater than the field coming off our brain. Electroencephalogram. The EKG, the electrocardiogram, we knew way back in the 1940s that the field from the heart was at least 3 feet big around our bodies, because you could put a lead on the middle finger way out and hold your arm way out and still get electromagnetic. We have an instrument now called the SQUID, Superconducting Quantum Interference Device. Now, we've had it for about 20 years. That can measure electromagnetic fields outside of a vacuum, resonance imaging. And we see that the heart field extends at least 15 feet away from the body. Huge field. And it's picking up vibrational interference patterns and taking them into our body and giving us the first sense of what's going on around us. And I think we know that. You know that. You walk into a room and people may be smiling, but you know that there's something wrong, just intuitively. Well, we're picking those vibrations up, and those are incoherent vibrations, we now know. So we're telling more from our environment from this heart field that Dr. Tiller calls it a step-down transducer. It's slowing the vibrational field down so that we can understand it with our senses. And the brain is kind of the last to get it. It's a meaning maker is all. The body is picking up these other vibrations. So, interesting kind of thing. The heart is picking this up. So the study started where they started looking at the fact that if you put a kg sensor that when someone is present, absolutely present, and they're enjoying their life, they're like a little child, they're very, very much in the moment, that the heart wave, the wave, it's an R wave off of the EKG, becomes very even. So they started calling that as a coherent heart wave. When someone is under stress, the heart wave is very erratic. It's up and down and all over the place. This R wave, this R lead, is incoherent. Now they started equating this with a lot of things, like bodily functions, for instance. When we're coherent, the parasympathetic nervous system takes over, our heart rate becomes very even, our breathing becomes very even. The prefrontal cortex of our brain, which has to do with really seeing our world, taking in information, understanding the patterns of our world, and then taking those patterns, remembering them, so that we can learn, optimally learn, and then taking those patterns and shifting them, coming up with creative ideas, increases. The hormones of our body become very balanced, and everything works in compliance so that we are absolutely healthy. We don't get sick, and we live in a very optimal potential way in our life. When we're under stress, the opposite occurs. System changes. We start producing high levels of adrenaline and cortisol. Our immune system goes down. We start getting sick. We're unable to remember and think clearly. We're unable to come up with forget. I mean, this is as we get older and we feel some of that stress. That's when we're not thinking properly. We don't remember. We get sick, and our body starts to break down. Cortisol is the most violent immunodepressant known to man. So we start breaking down tissues when our stress levels are high. We see it is implicated in all of the major diseases now. Cancer, multiple sclerosis. All of doctors have known for a long time now that stress is the major component in all of. So that's when we're in an incoherent state. So what we want to do is be stress-free, to really live passionately, live in that. Again, how do we do it? First of all, one of the things for me that has been very important is I think, I have been all over the world. I've worked in 40 countries all over the world. And I see things. One of the things that really got my attention, I was in South Africa when Nelson Mandela became president.
Mm-hmm.
And I was back there many times. It was a very exciting time. And I got to go to a talk he gave at a boys' school. It was a graduation ceremony, and he had come, this was in Durban, to give a talk to these boys. He's phenomenal. He's quite an orator, and he comes so much from his heart. What a survivor, We could come back to that and how we do survive. What we're finding in the research right now. But he gave this talk, and it was a sunny, hot day in Durban. And here were all of these boys out on this expansive lawn, the sun in their eyes, and they were in rapt attention of his talk. When he finished, and it wasn't a long talk, but it was very, when he finished, they stood up and they clapped for 20 minutes. I was very impressed. And I then got on the plane to come back home, and here was the International Time magazine. On the cover was a picture of this graduation, and it was a picture over Nelson Mandela's shoulder with spanning the sea of faces of these boys as they sat there listening to his talk.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very interesting because the school, it was an integrated school, but there were very few black students. And here were all of these white students, and they had their eyes shielded. There were the sun was so bright in their eyes that they were, it looked like they were frowning because they were shielding their eyes from the sun to look at him. Here was this one little black boy in the middle of this with his eyes wide open, and the caption read, "Amid a sea of angry faces." And it was like, wow, what had happened here? The news media had turned this event around. It was amazing to me. The same thing had occurred when Chris Hani was killed. Chris Hani was right-hand man. Mm-hmm. And I was flying into Cape Town, and the CNN was saying, Cape Town burning. And I didn't see any smoke as I was flying in. And the woman that picked me up said, CNN is saying Cape Town's burning. And I said, well, I didn't see any smoke. And she says, we need to get across Cape Town to this venue you're speaking in an hour. Well, let's just put light around the car and go. And we did. We didn't see anything, any smoke. The next day we came into Cape Town. They said it had burned. And there was one block where people had broken some windows in this building, this one building, and the building next to it had been started on fire. It had been vacated. That was it. 2 days later, CNN got busted. They didn't have any footage, so they brought in footage from the Los Angeles riots. You know, our media...
If you don't have a fire, bring in something from something that is unrelated.
Totally unrelated. And they told me in South Africa they're always using footage from someplace with tribal groups that don't even exist in South Africa. You know, they sensationalize the news. I don't watch the news. And I don't, you know, that's really helpful for me. I don't have a television. I figure if I need the news, I will get what I need, and I always do.
Right. You'll always have somebody somewhere that will tell you about the day. In fact, it's interesting that you bring that up, Carla, is that, you know, like you said, you will tend to get all the news you need. You don't even need to ask for it. Because we've gotten to a point this day and age that many people start their conversations or ways of relating with others. Did you see the newest movie, you know, or did you hear about this? And you sometimes have to wonder if these wonderfully intelligent people really experience life for themselves, and most of all, question things that, you know, as they're relating them, tend to have a stress factor within them.
You know, the media does it. It makes us feel helpless and hopeless, you know, and which isn't true. It isn't reality, you know. And so we don't have to worry about terrorists. Our own media keeps us in a survival situation so that we are incoherent in our bodies, which means that we get sick. It means that we can't remember. It means that we can't create, we can't come up with solutions to everyday situations or maybe to the more global situations that we need to be looking at today.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's how to stay coherent. Don't be stressed.
You know, Carla, as you were talking about coherence and you were talking about how the body and the mind can be very elastic, I was thinking of the wonderful work which is The Biology of Belief by Dr. Bruce Lipton. And, you know, this has been a book that's really been heavily, you know, waved around and quoted, and there's some good reasons why, but I was explaining, and I've actually explained this to a couple of people. Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a PhD, but I think we're all doctors, we're all PhDs, as long as we're willing to be open and pretty much flexible in what it is that we do learn. But in his book, he talks about how the body has some 50 trillion cells, which I find astounding because I remember it seemed, you know, 10 years ago it was half of that, so apparently we keep discovering there's more and more cells within the body. But let's just take the 50 trillion, and one of his biggest, I guess, discoveries, as it was back in the 60s in teaching these students outside of the United States in the islands off of Florida, is that he was saying, you know, we were stuck in this belief that genetics played a major role in the outcomes of our lives. For instance, if you had cancer in the family, or perhaps Alzheimer's was a history in your family, that genetically it was believed that genes weren't changeable, that they would pass these genetic codes on to their offspring, and therefore you believed that, well, now I have a disposition for cancer. But what he discovered was quite really, if you will, the opposite was true, that genes are sort of nature's measuring point to how we can engage and measure the environment, to communicate with the cells, to create survival mechanisms, if you will, so that they can be at optimal levels of survival and growing. And I started thinking about what he was talking about, a few years ago, and as you mentioned earlier in the program, when you're beginning to see autism now, what is it, at the rate of 1 in 100 children are diagnosed with autism. Now, autism 5 years ago and 10 years ago was one of them strange phenomenons that for me, just like cancer back in the early 1970s was, it was one of these strange phenomenons that was rare. It was like being struck by lightning you were more likely to experience than having either of these things. And what I was describing with people, just following the sense of, say, his work, is that perhaps we have so much information, so much of technology and electromagnetic radiation made by humans around us that suddenly our parents take in this information and learn how to shut it down so that they can just function through the day. That we pass that on to our children as they are born into this world, as you see autistics shut down. And they call these children hypersensitive. Well, what are your thoughts on something like that?
Well, again, I do think, they are hypersensitive. They're picking up. Our children pick us up.
Mm-hmm.
They mirror us, and we know that, these mirror neurons. And these are very sensitive children that are picking up our stress, that are picking up all of that. Let me talk. I think this is important, especially on your radio program. How do you stop this stress? One of the ways is through movement. It's really important. And I think in everything that I pick up, AARP said there's one exercise that you can do the rest of your life that will keep you out of stress. Walking.
Mm-hmm.
Taking a walk, walking in nature. Whenever you walk, there's a cross-lateral integrated movement that happens in the body, and then the brain actually comes into coherence. When we're under stress, 80% of the neocortex in the non-dominant side of the brain will shut down because you don't need it. You don't need to think. You don't need to create. You're just in stress. You can't remember. But when you start moving, here's a really interesting statistic that I just love that ties back into this and will make us good models for the children around us and the people around us. Dancing. They did a huge study with people that were between the ages of 70 and 90, and they found that those that danced once or twice a week decreased their chances of Alzheimer's and dementia by 79%. And those that pick up a musical instrument decrease that chance by 69%. Moving, dancing, playing, getting out in nature, walking, will assist that. Yes, we are getting these children coming in that are picking us up. So what does that say? We need to realize that we're masters,
mm-hmm.
that we are in charge of our reality and choosing to really be present in our moment. Move. Get moving. Play. I use the term play. Physical play. Playing with children. Go out there. Let them lead. So here's a real interesting study that's done with autistic children. Stanley Greenspan has been working with this, and the University of Michigan working with a play project with autistic children. And they find that they teach the parents, these are brittle autistics, These are children that are runners and screamers that make no facial contact, can't do any like that. They teach the parents to do what they call floor time. Get on the floor with these children. They mimic what the children do, and then they start playing with them, and they get very present absolutely with those children. And they found something interesting. Those parents that spend 15 hours a week, that's a couple hours a day, being absolutely present with those children, at the end of the year, 69% of those children have you can see no sign of autism.
My goodness.
No sign of autism. Now, this whole thing of being present with another person, usually we're multitasking, and people come into our lives and they just want to talk to us, but we're thinking of our grocery list, or we're thinking of the next thing or they'll say something, and we're thinking of how to save them, what they need to do, what we need, their advice we need to give them. Forget it, if we can absolutely be present. Psychologists tell us children, all they need is 15 minutes of us being absolutely present with them a day for them to feel safe to go out and explore their world. But it's not just true of children, it's true of all of us. All we need is someone to really listen to us. I think we're seeing so much right now with the elderly, where there's this higher level of Alzheimer's and dementia. I think part of it is nobody's listening to them. Nobody's taking the time to be absolutely present, to see the wisdom that they have. I really think right now, Lynn Margulis at Princeton University said the way we evolve present is by communication and cooperation. So, taking a walk with a child and having them lead and do what they do, play, taking a walk with a friend, really listening to them.
There was a wonderful exercise that I learned about actually about almost a year ago, and it came from a book called Do You Quantum Think? And she simply said, be in one conversation. And what she had suggested to do was exactly what you're talking about, is that when you're in a conversation, whether it's just with one person or within a group, simply be present. You might find those urges at times that you want to chime in or something rings your bell where you feel this urge to contribute, to put in your own piece. And that's where sort of its own miracle came to play as I began to realize how often at times I would want to chime in and to begin to pay attention as to what was driving me to want to do that. What was driving me to want to maybe prove a point, maybe suggest, something. And as I began to do that, I began to notice that exactly what you're talking about is it began to take my vibration down to a calmness to where I was beginning to feel not only am I present, but you start picking up more and more signals around you of these miracles, which are usually almost always in the moment, of possibilities of how you can move to the next, direction, if you will. And it's quite fascinating what you talk about in your book, Playing in the Unified Field, because that's all it takes. And it's funny how a lot of us will know that. It's about being in the now, being present, the power of now, Books are all out there telling us how to do something that, for instance, we're really hardwired to do, but we get so distracted. And it would be just fun if we would vibrate ourselves back down to being rooted into a moment to see the infinite possibilities that lie before us.
Yeah. Quiet. Then we know. I teach around the world, all over, and I don't use notes anymore. What I found out is if I can just be in the moment, present, I'll know what to say, when to not say. I'm always getting comments from people that fit into a puzzle that I've been working on and I didn't understand. And somebody will say, well, I thought this, and I wonder about how this works, and this, and, it's like, bingo, I've got the answer. So listening, teachers are all out there.
Right. Carla, I'm reminded of about 10 years ago, I started broadcasting and doing radio, actually a little more than 10 years ago. And I kind of fell into the interview style almost by accident, because as a child I had always wanted to be the disc jockey, spending records and having fun, pretty much telling the listeners what was going on in the day. Here I'm at the beach party, or I'm at the drag races, and, this coming up. And I did. There were actually times, I've even shared this story, where as I was in, junior high school, for instance, that I would actually skip school, stay home, put blankets up over the windows so it was dark in the house. This was during the 1970s, especially the late 1970s. And I'd turn on the stereo, and that's what I would do. I would disc jockey. I even had a microphone where I could record tapes and, the music that was coming off of the stations, and I'd do this, and once in a while I'll peek out. Hopefully Mom's not coming home. Anyway, the thing is that was the intention that I had, although I didn't pursue it for the longest time, and it wasn't until my 30s that I finally had that opportunity where somebody at a speech says, I want to be the world's greatest radio interviewer. And I decided to ask him afterwards. I said, well, where do you do this at? Because I was determined I'm going to find a way to pursue this. And he says, well, I do it at the local PBS station. And so he suggested who I contact, and so I did. And the next thing you know, I'm talking with the gentleman that runs this, and he says, so what do you want to do here? I said, well, I want to pretty much broadcast on radio. He says, great. This guy's coming in studio in about 3.5 hours. Why don't you sit down? We'll fire up the mic, and you can interview him. I thought, well, that was awfully fast. Well, anyway, I began to, of course, read through the book, because I thought, well, that's what you do, is that you get to know your subject, and then you sit down, and then you have this show, and you talk with them. Now, one of the neat performances, and I've had many, thousands even, is that I had actress Mariel Hemingway in studio one time.
Oh my!
And it's kind of fun. You got the celebrities and people, they love those stories. But I say, my celebrities are people that you may have never heard of, such as, for instance, Carla Hannaford. And what was interesting is in this particular meeting is that she had an assistant that was coming along with her, and I think she was more of a really good friend that just traveled with her. And I invited her to come on in and sit in the studio with us as we did this. And at first she was hesitant, but then she finally said, well, yeah, sure, I'll go ahead and I'll sit in studio. And I also brought my daughter in with me, because I thought this would be a neat experience for her as well, to see what I'm doing and to meet some of the people that I was meeting. And what was interesting was, as just before we were about to start the show, is she looked across the table and she says, well, do you have any notes or anything in front of you? And, some questions that you're going to ask? And I just kind of looked up and smiled, and I said, well, I guess I have some things in mind, but we'll go ahead and we'll go about doing this. And an hour later, we were done. It was on a memoir that she had produced about her life. And her friend says, you're amazing. I just, had really no intention of sitting here, and I've been with a lot of interviews, and Mariel reacted the same way, and they said what surprised them was that I didn't use any notes. And I said, well, I had read your book, and I just kind of allowed things to flow with in mind what I thought might be interesting or should be interesting to our listeners. And in your book, Playing in the Unified Field, I think as people read this, they begin to understand that there is a real natural flow, that forcing a thing just isn't as necessary as we tend to have been built to believe.
In the moment, everything flows exactly right. There's miracles, miracles, miracles.
And I think one of the neatest things, too, for our listeners to suggest is, for instance, broadcasting here out of Portland, Oregon, we have the Washington Park Zoo. And I believe every year, it's not a huge significant zoo, for instance, perhaps like, of course, the San Diego Zoo, but anyway, what they have, and I believe it's still every year, is they have a butterfly exhibit.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this is a wonderful thing because, you know, you go into this nice atrium, I think is what you might call this, where there are all these variety and species of butterflies, which that in itself you feel like you've just transcended into a world of fairies. But even more miraculous for me, and it's been a good few years that I've been wanting to go back to this sense when it shows up. The butterflies are miraculous, and the plant life and all of that, how it's all set up, are just magical. But for me, what I enjoyed the most were the children. Seeing their wonderment as they're holding this butterfly, watching their faces, you go away from that and you think, I want to take that out into the world, what I've experienced here through these children. You know,
they are our greatest teachers.
They really. In fact, you talk about in your book, you know, taking the next step too is that the people that we get involved with healing, for instance, tend to be the teachers that teach us what we need to heal within ourselves.
Right. Absolutely. You know, I wanted one last thought that ties right into this is back to Nelson Mandela. Research on how people survive. And I think of the children that were in the concentration camps that drew pictures of butterflies on the walls, you know, of the gas chambers. You know, left those. And Nelson Mandela, the studies show right now those people that survive in very desperate situations like that were not the optimists, which was interesting to me. You know, the ones that said, "Oh, somebody's going to come and save us," you know, and by Easter, somebody's going to come and save us by the summer. It didn't happen. They gave up hope. It wasn't the pessimists. It was the people like Nelson Mandela who were absolutely present. Said, "This is the situation that I'm in. This is the playground that I'm in. This is the situation. How can I make my life better?" And if you've seen the movie Invictus, it talks about, he used that poem, I am the exercised every day, wrote, and he read, and built his life. And here we are. We're not in a prison for all the glorious world. Being childlike, like you say, at the zoo, you know. We're in the zoo. Every moment, just really seeing it with new eyes, with childlike eyes. We've manifested this. Living it no matter how old we are. Jerome Bruner is, well, he's now 96. He is still teaching at the New York University in the law department. He's amazing. You know, retire. What does that mean? Forget it. He's out there. He's experiencing. He's growing. He's learning every moment.
Which, by the way, Carla, is our mission, is to remove the ideal, not just of retirement, but that every day there's something that we can not only do, but that we can express about ourselves until we can no longer do that.
Right. And we're growing new nerve cells, until the day we die. Did you know that?
Absolutely.
Movement causes this. And we as older folks have more efficient brains. We have no excuses.
Carla, I'm reminded as we were talking about movement earlier and I was sharing the evolution of my disc jockeying, is Saturday Night Fever certainly had a wonderful splash in its time, didn't it?
Oh, it did.
We wanted to dress nice. We wanted to dance.
Yeah.
We wanted to shine.
Yeah.
And now movies today, when it comes to dancing, are too busy about roughshod competition. This was a guy that just wanted something better for himself than he was having, and I think that's what we all want. I remember as that movie came out, and I am no ashamed of saying is, to me, probably about my most favorite influential movie, because I said, I want that for myself,
Right.
and I know a lot of people resonated the same way around the world.
Mm-hmm. The song, I Hope You'll Dance. Out there, get out and dance.
Now, talk briefly with the short bit of time that we have left about Brain Gym. This was something that you kind of really been involved with, almost creating in some ways, as I understand.
Well, Brain Gym comes from a lot of different areas. They're movements. They're cross-lateral integrated movements that Paul Dennison took from applied kinesiology, from yoga, from all sorts of different areas. And they're just cross-lateral integrated movements like walking. And whenever we do these movements, we're integrating the whole brain-body system. And as I was saying before, the body is what gets it first. The brain is just a meaning maker. And so right now, we're looking at the more we move, the more active we are in our insights, in our creativity, in our memory, everything. So Brain Gym is a real simple way to do that. There's some where at any time, with any age. There's a wonderful woman in Maui right now that it's called Giving Back, the Giving Back program. Go online and look at, and she works with all of these elderly people, getting them moving. And they're doing amazing things, and then they're going into the schools and working with the kids that are having problems. Wonderful program. So, cross-lateral integrated movement. Activating the eyes. I don't plan to wear glasses. And to have my eyes moving. To have my whole body moving. Staying active. We know that after my this surgery that I had on my back, and it was major surgery to fuse my lower back. I do Brain Gym every day. I do integrated cross-lateral movements. I do Pilates. I do Feldenkrais movements, and I walk, and I can touch my toes. I can dance all night. As long as we keep moving. The Brain Gym movements, I have them in my book. I have some of the movements. I have more movements in my book, Smart Moves, Why Learning is Not All You. And you can go to braingym.org and look at the movements. They're wonderful. They're very simple. Anybody can do them. Using them in the schools, I go into the schools. I feel like I need to know what children are doing, and I go in and I get to go into the schools and do music classes and movement classes. Right now I'm teaching fourth graders to play the ukulele and sing. We're singing a lot. Using our voices, using our instrument. This is the most complex instrument on the planet is the human voice.
Mm-hmm.
Singing vibrates our whole instrument, tones our muscles. So singing and moving, walking, again, it's simple. The problem, I think, is that it is simple. And we are in such a technological age that we think we need to have in tools or expensive things to activate us.
If it isn't complicated, then it must not work.
Right. Yeah, this body that we have is so phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
We need to use it.
The book is Playing in the Unified Field, Raising and Becoming Conscious, Creative Human Beings. Our wonderful guest today, Carla Hannaford. I want to thank you for joining us here on our program. Is there a website people can find out more about your work?
Yes, there is. It's just www.carlahannaford.com.
And just remember, if you keep life simple and enjoy the simple things, you will find, as in the name of Carla Hannaford's daughter, that life will become a breeze. Thank you for joining us here on the program, Carla.
Thank you, Daniel.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there. Again, keep it simple and keep in the moment. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. Also, be sure to visit us at our website, where we'll have a link there as well for Playing in the Unified Field. And be sure to visit our blog as well. We also have a free weekly e-newsletter. Be sure to sign up for that as well. Again, thank you for joining us. This is Beyond 50. Remember, live your day past halfway.